morning. Thank you for all being here this morning and for the opportunity to speak. Harry and I are going to do a little tag team, so I'll start off and then he'll present some of the slides and then I'll come back and finish off today. We will have a period for questions at the end, but if you do have questions throughout, feel free to raise your hand and I can answer those as we go throughout. So we're going to talk about a couple things today. As you know, this is a pretty hot topic right now. There's a lot going on in the regulatory world, and we're going to take the opportunity to give a little bit of background on antibiotic use in pork production, go through some of the current antibiotic regulations and some of the new antibiotic regulations that you've probably been hearing about in the news from FDA, and then talk a little bit about what this means to you on the farm and what you can do as producers to prepare for some of the upcoming regulations. So the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, is responsible for regulating both animal and human antibiotics. So that means they approve these antibiotics for use in animals. And when they do so, they look at safety for the animal, food safety, the environment, and as well as human safety. On the other hand, the state pharmacy boards have the authority over veterinary prescribing. So when a veterinarian prescribes that on the farm, the authority for that prescribing ability comes from the state. The FDA has 4 antibiotic label claims. So these are the claims that you see when you look at a label, and they are disease treatment, disease control, disease prevention, and growth promotion or improvement of nutritional efficiency. And this is an important point because the FDA considers treatment, control, and prevention to be therapeutic uses. And that's something you'll see a little bit differently. Often when we see our public interest groups or activist groups talking, they talk about therapeutic use strictly as treatment. But we'll remember that FDA considers treatment, control, and prevention to be therapeutic uses and considers them necessary for animal health and welfare. This is another term that you've probably seen a lot in the upcoming regulations, as well as a lot of media stories, is the term medically important. So this is used in the FDA guidance or the policies that are coming out. And as defined by FDA, it's antibiotics that are the same or in the same classes as antibiotics that are used to treat humans. So what this means to us and to most of the livestock industry is that most antibiotics approved for use in animal feed are considered medically important. So they will fall or be part of this guidance through FDA. Now the exceptions to this in swine at this point would be bacitracin, mecadox, narracin, bambamycin, and tamulin. So there's a few that don't fall under this, but the majority that are used in pork production are considered medically important. And I'm just going to back up one point here as well. When we talk about medically important as defined by FDA, so that means that they're used to treat illness in humans. Antibiotics in feed. So antibiotics, when they're used in feed, must be used according to the label directions. So that means veterinarians cannot use them extra label. They have to use them as well as the producer as what is written on the label. In order to apply them in feed, well, we'll see, in the past we've had 2 products, and Harry's going to talk a little bit more about this, products that fall under the Veterinary Feed Directive. With the impending regulations, we'll see that the majority of our products are now under a Veterinary Feed Directive or prescription. So a Veterinary Feed Directive is a veterinary order. It's similar to a prescription, but technically it's not a prescription. It has FDA oversight and not the state pharmacy boards. The current requirements for the Veterinary Feed Directive, so the way it stands right now with the 2 products that are under them, is that it's written for the amount of feed to be consumed in a time period. An original copy is required to the feed mill within 5 days. It requires a veterinary client-patient relationship. Refills are not quite straightforward in there, and we'll talk a little bit more about the way it currently is and the new VFD that was just finalized yesterday. And records have to be kept by the mill, veterinary, and farmer for 2 years. Any questions on that piece? Yes?
How does a farmer keep records? Just hold on to the feed, deliver ticket?
Yeah, they have to keep, there's a VFD form, and that has to be, I believe, a hard copy, and Harry will talk a little bit more about, we'll go through that piece when coming up.
Back up 2 slides.
Yep. All right. So, talking a little bit about some of the regulatory action. As I'm sure you're all aware, there's been a lot of activity on the regulatory side, a lot of interest in antibiotic use in livestock and how and why antibiotics are used, and a focus on monitoring a little bit more of that use and veterinary oversight as part of that. So about 2010, the FDA developed a strategy on antimicrobial resistance. And this strategy involved three big pieces. So the way I look at this is Guidance 209 is sort of their umbrella strategy, and Guidance 213 and the veterinary feed directives are the way that Guidance 209 is implemented. The bottom line of the FDA strategy is the removal of medically important antibiotics, so that's those ones we talked about earlier, removal of those medically important antibiotics for growth promotion and nutritional efficiency and increased veterinary oversight. So into a little more detail, Guidance 209 is how the regulatory agency will conduct their business. So it does not have the force of law, but it does provide the agency position on regulatory matters, and voluntary is really relative. So this is the way it's moving forward, and this is how Guidance 213 and VFD will implement it. Under Guidance 209, production uses, so those are for growth promotion and nutritional efficiency, of antibiotics that are in classes used for human medicine are considered injudicious. So they're not considered unsafe. The use is just considered injudicious according to the FDA guidance. It requires that the other uses of these same classes of antibiotics, so that means these medically important antibiotics, no longer be able to be used for growth promotion, but they can be used for treatment, control, and prevention. But when they are used for treatment, control, and prevention, they have to be under veterinary oversight. So that's either a VFD or a prescription. So in the past, some of these products would have been available over the counter, and now when you use them for prevention, control, and treatment, they'll require veterinary oversight. So again, just repeating here, in terms of swine production, this affects most of the antibiotics that we use, with the exception of a few of them that will remain over the counter for growth promotion. Will remain available for growth promotion and over the counter in feed and water. So FDA is working voluntarily with sponsors to discontinue claims or migrate those production or growth promotion claims to disease prevention, and Guidance 213 is what gives the roadmap to the drug sponsors in order to do this. At this point, the animal health sponsors have all agreed to voluntarily surrender their approvals for growth promotion and move the remaining therapeutic uses under a veterinary feed directive or a prescription for the affected products. And this is to be implemented by the end of 2016. So the FDA gave a 3-year period when they put Guidance 213 in place for this to occur. The drug sponsors had to announce their intentions to do this, and they all did so. And by the end of 2016 is the deadline for them to have gone through this process. So Guidance 213 has been finalized. The VFD, as of yesterday, is finalized. Of course, there's a comment period with that, and Harry's going to talk a little bit more about that specifically when we get to his section. Growth promotion and nutritional efficiency labels will be removed by December 2016, as I said earlier, under Guidance 213, and that is the medically important antimicrobials or antibiotics. Disease prevention, control, and treatment will be a VFD in water or a prescription in feed. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. A VFD in feed or a prescription in water. So what does this really mean? What it means is that most growth promotion uses will end within 3 years, so by the end of 2016, so 3 years from the start of 2013. Most feed-grade antibiotics will no longer be available over the counter, but will require a veterinarian order, and antibiotics in water will require a prescription. So this is a significant regulatory step that will result in how antibiotics are used on the farm. Once those labels are changed, it will be illegal to utilize these antibiotics to promote growth, and the producers will be required to have a VFD or prescription to use these products in feed and in water. So that means, as you can see from that, we talked about the list of those antibiotics, producers are going to lose some antibiotics or uses of antibiotics, meaning we'll lose some of those uses for growth promotion, and they'll require increased time and increased cost because you're going to have to work very closely with your veterinarian VFDs will have to be written to use them in feed that didn't need to be in the past, and prescriptions for some of those to be used in water that didn't need to be in the past. And producers are really going to need to have that close relationship with their veterinarian. The question still remains, and as we went through this process, FDA had several listening sessions on the VFD early on, about 2 years ago, particularly in the rural areas where we brought both producers and veterinarians to talk specifically about the access of rural veterinarians, and so how producers in those areas are going to be able to access veterinarians in order to get a VFD or prescription when they need them. This still remains an issue. It's something the FDA is aware of and something we're continuing to work on, including increasing capacity of rural veterinarians. So I'm going to hand it over to Harry now. He's going to talk a little bit about the veterinary producer relationship and what you can do to prepare on the farm.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so as Jennifer alluded to, the relationship between the veterinarian and the producer on the farm is going to become very critical for access to antimicrobials that previously may have been purchased over the counter or without any necessity for prescription or anything like that. So we want to talk a little bit about what the implications are of that for veterinarians as well as for producers. Fortunately, swine producers and swine veterinarians are familiar with the VFD process in a broad scope anyway, because we've had the only two products that were labeled VFD prior to now, and that was Pulmotil and Nuflor. And so those products will retain a VFD license, and they'll be acquired much as the same as they have in the past. But now we're going to add all of those other products that Jennifer was talking about to the VFD list. So a lot of the medications that you may have been used to purchasing over the counter, you're now going to have to go through a veterinarian in order to get access to those antimicrobials. So again, veterinarians will work very closely with the clients to ensure that there is ongoing judicious use and appropriate use of antibiotics, and that's sort of the purpose of what FDA is trying to achieve with the changes to the VFD process, is to increase that level of veterinary interaction. So first and foremost, you need to secure a good working relationship with your herd veterinarian. If you don't already have a herd veterinarian, then you need to try to find somebody that you can work with, because there's going to be first, you're going to have that relationship in order to get access to these antimicrobials, and then the length of time within which you can use those antimicrobials is going to be defined. And so if you're having to use something long term, you're going to have to get repeated VFDs for access to those products. So you're going to have to develop a relationship with a veterinarian. And that's going to become very critical as those products do transition to VFD. As Jennifer said, all of the medically important antimicrobials are going to transition to VFD in the feed on January 1 of 2017, actually. So between now and then, you're going to start seeing labels change and educational outreach and information about what it's going to mean to you in order to access these products. So a few of the things and you're really here on the cusp of this information coming out. As Jennifer said, the final VFD rule was issued just yesterday. It's 102 pages long. We worked through it yesterday afternoon, and I sort of pulled out some of the key points that I think impact producers and veterinarians, and wanted to run through those and make you aware of what some of those changes are going to be. The first is a 2-year record maintenance. Actually, this is consistent with what the existing VFD requires. There had been some discussion within FDA about changing this to a 1-year requirement, but the final rule actually does require 2 years maintenance. And that means that the veterinarian, the distributor of the product, and the producer have to maintain those records for a period of no less than 2 years. Now, previously those records were all hard copy, paper records. Now, with the new VFD coming forward, there is the opportunity for electronic transfer of those VFD records. So you can either maintain those records as a hard copy paper record in a file cabinet, or as an electronic record. So that's changed a little bit and made it a little bit more convenient for all of us to operate with the VFD process. There's going to be an expiration date on that VFD, and the expiration date is the length of time for which that VFD is legal, is acceptable for you to go purchase medicated feed under that VFD. The two drugs that are out there now have an established expiration date on the label, Pulmotil and Nuflor. Pulmotil, for example, I think the expiration date is 45 days, if I'm not mistaken. So what that means is that even though the period of time you can use the drug in the pigs might be 21 days, you have a total of 45 days within which that VFD is actually applicable. So at the end of that 45-day period, you would have to get another VFD through the veterinarian in order to continue to use that product. If the product does not have a previously assigned expiration date, which most of the other products will not because that wasn't part of their approval process, then the veterinarian has to assign an expiration date to that VFD. And they can assign any expiration date up to six months, can't exceed 6 months. So with a VFD product, at least every 6 months, you're going to have to get an updated VFD, and it could be less than that depending on the situation at the time. It is illegal for any VFD feed to be used beyond that 6 month, the expiration of that VFD. So if you have product on the farm that you haven't used and you're out of date on the VFD, if you utilize that product, that is illegal. FDA can declare that as an adulterated product and can take legal action associated with that. So that expiration date is important. Yeah, Mark.
So they can't feed that feed, but can they have that product on the farm?
That's not 100% clear. I believe the answer to that is yes, but you can't feed it. Yeah.
Who is going to keep track of all this?
Well, and that is spelled out in the VFD, and that's part of the process of this transition. And FDA has said that they recognize there's a transition period. They don't really define exactly what that is, but the second part of their implementation will be looking for violations of the VFD. So they're going to do that by, and it lists in the final rule how they plan to do that, but part of it is by previous records associated with VFD or use of product, things like that. So it's not clear, yeah.
So what about all the pre-starters that are manufactured and called through a three-stage delay that have CPC benefits?
Yeah, and all of those are challenges for the manufacturers and the distributors part of this, which I'm not an expert on that side of the business, but in order to utilize those products across state lines, it depends on, my reading of the final rule with FDA is that the veterinarian is required to comply with whatever state laws are in place in the state that the product's being used. So in most cases, they would have to be licensed in that state, but there are states where they...
The state part, they'd have to be 2 miles away.
Yeah.
They can pre-start, you don't know behind it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge and one they have to work through. Yeah, you're exactly right. There's a fair number of those kinds of things that go on within the feed manufacturing industry and how that's moved across from various farms. So yeah, you're right. There's some issues there that still need to be worked out. And as Jennifer said, there's 120. I think it's a 120-day comment period with this final rule. So when you look through it and you find things like that are of concern, I would strongly recommend that you comment on those, and they will respond in the ultimate final rule. They will respond to those comments, so hopefully they'll address those issues. The VCPR, the veterinary client-patient relationship, this is something that went through a number of iterations with the veterinary feed directive rule, and ultimately what FDA decided is that the veterinarian and the producer need to comply with the state veterinary regulations regarding the need to have a veterinary client-patient relationship. If those state regulations comply with the minimum standards set forward by FDA, then FDA will secede to the state on those issues. If the state does not have a VCPR in their Practice Act, then you have to comply with the VCPR that is codified in the federal regulations for FDA. So it's a little bit fuzzy there, but I think it's clearer now than it had been at one point because there are other VCPRs that are out there. The American Veterinary Medical Association has a VCPR that's a little different than than some of the others, and it does vary state to state somewhat. So basically, from a veterinary standpoint, this is critical to understand that you need to either comply with the state regulations associated with VCPR, if those are adequate to meet the federal requirements. If not, then we need to comply with the federal requirements. And FDA will be posting a list of the states and their individual requirements, whether or not those comply with the federal regs. Yeah.
For on-farm feed mills,
Mhm.
will the VFD be by feed mill, or will it have to be by PREM ID?
This is strictly on-farm mixing. Is that what you're talking about? Use on the farm? Then I think you don't. My understanding is that. Well, let me back up and say that most of the larger distributors and feed mill manufacturers have to request from FDA the ability to manufacture this feed, a one-time request. My understanding is that on-farm feed mixers for use on the farm would not have to do that. So it would be to the premise where the mill's located, and assume the animals.
No, not necessarily to the barn.
Well, yeah, there's still some confusion about that as far as what they mean by. And it's spelled out in there, but to be honest with you, I didn't have time to get into that level of detail as far as what they consider to be a farm or an operation. Jennifer, I don't know if you are aware, and it is spelled out in there, and it's just in the weeds, and I didn't get into it. Somebody else may be able to answer that. I don't know, but I do know that if you're manufacturing feed for use for your animals, but you're also selling it or distributing it to another farm owner, then no, you're going to be classified as a distributor in that case and have to go through the application process and all of that. So as long as it's being used strictly on your farm, then yeah, I don't think you don't have to be listed as a distributor. These are the minimum requirements in the FDA guidelines for an adequate veterinary client-patient relationship. And that is that the veterinarian engage with the client to assume the responsibility for making clinical judgments about animal health. Second, that the veterinarian have sufficient knowledge of the patient or animals by virtue of doing some type of examination and or visits to the facility where the animals are located. And thirdly, that the veterinarian provide for any necessary follow-up evaluation or care. And inherent in this is that the producer agrees to comply with what the veterinarian prescribes. So as long as the state veterinary practice acts can comply with this, then you're fine from a state standpoint. If not, then you have to fall back to this as the federal minimal for a VCPR. So refills. This has been a confusing issue as we've gone through the iterations with FDA on the VFD. And ultimately, the final rule came down to, as far as refills were concerned, which is an authorization to utilize additional VFD feed under the same conditions that you have the existing VFD by the expiration date. In other words, if you run out of product before the end of the expiration date on the VFD, then you could request a refill under certain conditions. And actually, those are very finite conditions. The veterinarian would have to assign refills on the VFD, just like they do for a prescription for human medicine, for instance. If you're going to get, it tells how often you can get a product refilled, that kind of thing. But the only time that the veterinarian can do that is if refills are actually allowed on the label of the product. And currently today, there are no products that have refill requirements on the label. So as it is today, refills would not be allowed within the VFD process. Now, in the future, somebody could produce a medication and put a refill on the label, and you'd be fine. You could do that. But as it is today, there are no products that would allow for a refill legally. One other change is that the new VFD will require that you estimate, or that the veterinarian estimate, the actual number of animals that will be receiving the product. Previously, they had to estimate the volume of product to be produced or feed to be produced, and that was always a very difficult thing to do because you never knew, how rapidly the animals were going to eat the feed, and how many animals were going to be in the barn and those kinds of things. So it's very hard to actually get any kind of legitimate estimate for the actual volume of feed. So this is actually, I think, going to be a better method of doing things. And FDA knows that the numbers aren't static, that, it's not going to always be 100% accurate what number of animals are going to receive the feed. So that's why they say it has to be an approximation or an estimation of the actual number of animals. One other key point that they made about the VFD is that it will not be used, cannot be used to actually estimate on-farm antibiotic usage. Obviously, there will be people who are interested in how much product is being used on the farm and in what manner it's being used. The way this VFD process is set up, you won't be able actually to adequately answer those questions. So they make a point in the final rule that the VFD as designed is not designed to be used as an estimate of on-farm use. So getting back, any other questions about VFD or the VCPR before I leave that? Yeah.
That last statement,
Okay.
the veterinarian has to estimate how many animals will be used, and has to calculate how much medicine that's going to take. In order to write a VFD, how can you say it will not be used, it can't be used?
Yeah, well, it's not to limit the volume of use. The purpose of it is to ensure that the products are used properly on the farm. That's the purpose. It's not, and that's a key issue. I mean, when you look at the activist groups, they're very big on a volume use number relative to resistance. And the fact of the matter is that the volume of use really doesn't have anything to do with the resistance issue. It's the issue with resistance is that bug-drug interaction. It's not how much product is being used. And the point that we want to make and why this whole on-farm data collection issue is a big deal is that, we're interested in understanding what practices that go on the farm may actually contribute to resistance down the road. And those are the practices that then we need to curtail and we need to manage if there are practices that can result in resistance. We want to understand that. We're not interested really in understanding the volume of product that's used per se. So the way this is designed is that just because you write a VFD doesn't necessarily mean that all of that feed is utilized or that all the animals on that farm receive that feed, which is what some groups have tried to do is they take that number and extrapolate it to, 100% of the animals on the farm get this product. So that's why they're saying that that number in and of itself isn't an estimation of use on the farm.
Under the minimum PCPR requirements, what do you think the definition of exam? In other words, there are going to be situations where a consultant veterinarian could legally write a VFD, even though he's never been on the farm, but he knows the flow of pigs, he knows the system. He could do an exam via remote digital pictures, descriptions, whatever. What's your feeling on how that will be?
Yeah, and that's been an issue ever since the VFD's been in place, and I think it was written that way on purpose. First, FDA has said numerous times they don't want to define what veterinary practice looks like. That's up to the individual state, veterinary practice acts, and the AVMA to make those determinations. So they weren't interested in dictating exactly how that works. So they've really left that up to the state veterinary practice acts to define that. And some of them define it very specifically and give a date and a length of time that you have to make visits. Other states, it's much more flexible and gray, and it's considered what is medically appropriate. So, I mean, that can vary, and it depends on, exactly as you said, depends on your familiarity with the system, with a farm in particular. Obviously, I think, from a veterinary perspective, it's important that you're doing diagnostics on those farms to determine what products need to be used, and that you obviously have access to those diagnostic reports and follow-up information on how the product worked and those kinds of things. So I don't think it necessarily necessitates on every farm that you be there every so often, but you have to have a medically appropriate familiarity with the animals and the conditions. Yeah.
I have a question. You can the next slide about the refills. So it said that you can't use the product if you don't have a refill for it or it doesn't have a claim for it. But it says it's based off the number of animals that are receiving it, not the feed amount. I mean, if it's a 6-month expiration, I guess I don't understand why you need a refill during that time if it's based off of the number of animals and not the amount of feed.
Yeah, if they ate well, see how it's going to work is that the veterinarian's going to have to give an estimate of the number of animals. That goes to the distributor. The distributor then, in association with the producer, they have to make that determination of how much feed they're going to have to produce and on what schedule in order to comply with the directive. But the difference in that is, in the current situation, the veterinarian had to estimate right up front, you're going to produce this volume of feed for this length of time. And the problem with that was, if you didn't put that many animals in, or you put more animals in, they ate quicker, they grew faster, whatever, then you ran out of feed, and you didn't have a method to change that.
Also, if it's a 6-month expiration and you want to continue using it for another 6 months after, can that come in? I mean, do they have to come in right at the end of that 6 months, or is there a few weeks prior, or how will that work for keeping it?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that it wouldn't have to be right at the end of the 6-month period. I mean, if the veterinarian came in on a regular herd health visit and said, you're still getting pigs from the same source, we need to, we're going to need to continue this or whatever, then they can make that determination at that time. So, yeah, I think I saw one of there. Yep.
Couple questions. One, if you're producing, you've got your own mill, it's not illegal for you to have CPC on the premises without a VFD currently in use.
My understanding is you would have to have a VFD to acquire that medication, that medicated feed.
Outside of the 6-month window, you're going to need it again.
You can't feed it.
Yeah, it's just sitting
Right.
there.
That's my understanding, is that you could have it on the farm, but you can't feed it. Yeah.
Okay. And then, what is Iowa law current for veterinary client relationships? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I don't know specifically. Liz, do you know by any chance?
We're trying to change it to the equivalent of the AVMA one, but I don't know if that's that done.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the specific wording in Iowa, but there is a requirement for VCPR in the Iowa code, right? Yeah. So, I'm pretty sure it's compliant with what the FDA requirement would be. Sure. Okay, back to preparation in general. Obviously, sitting down with your veterinarian, evaluating your animal health management protocols, particularly herd vaccination programs. I mean, obviously, we're trying to make sure that the use of antimicrobials on the farm is done judiciously. And if there are alternatives available, we'd like to explore those as options. Vaccination is a critical one of those alternatives. So, that's a good opportunity when the veterinarian's out there, is to work through these vaccination programs and make sure that you're doing what you can do to prevent disease in the first place. Reviewing all the swine medications currently being used on the operation, that's something that needs to occur on a regular basis. Making sure that, once we use a product, that there is a reason to continue to use it or an opportunity to stop using it and get off that product. Discussing the products that are going to be affected by veterinary feed directives and prescriptions. As Jennifer said, all the products we use, except for those 5 classes and categories that she mentioned, are going to come under a veterinary feed directive, and also the water medications that we currently use are going to require a prescription going forward. No. Growth promotion itself is going away, except for those 5 products that are listed. So yeah, it's for treatment, prevention, and control uses.
That we need a prescription for water. Thank you.
Record keeping. Record keeping is a critical part of this. As we said earlier, you're going to have to retain these records for a minimum of 2 years. And record keeping is one of those things that, the job's never done until the paperwork's finished, but I mean, it's just one more thing, and it's I know it's difficult to do, and it's not always foremost in everyone's mind, but it's going to need to be now, particularly with regards to antimicrobial use on the farm. FDA has the authority to come on the farm and inspect those records, and they would expect that you would have up-to-date VFDs for the drugs that you're using. And if they don't, if you don't, as we said before, that's going to be illegal. Continuing to follow best practices, following the VFD label instructions. Again, even veterinarians have to follow the feed grade label instructions that are on the label. We can't deviate from that. I mentioned before the Pullman Hill example, the 45-day period that's on there, the expiration period. We can't make it more or less than that. It's 45 days. We can't change the dose that's on feed grade antimicrobials. So it's illegal for us, and it's illegal for producers to use it in any manner other than how it's specifically stated on the label. Ensuring proper withdrawal intervals. I think that's an area where we can really hold our heads up high as an industry. This is related really to residue problems in feed. And, you know, the pork industry's done an excellent job. You guys have done an excellent job in adhering to these withdrawal periods. We have very, very, very low levels of residue in pork. So, you know, you've done an excellent job, and I would just encourage you to continue to do that. And, of course, PQA Plus, responsible antibiotic use practices, are a great reference to refer to understand these requirements and changes. So, Jennifer, I'll turn it back over to you. If there's any other quick questions. Yeah, Chuck.
You say we're in a comment period or whatever?
Yeah, there's a 120-day comment period after the rule was released yesterday. So I think that expires, what would that be, October 3rd. So we've got until then to make comment. Now, I'll be honest with you, with final rules, it's pretty rare for any of the agencies to make changes to their final rules once they're published, even though there is a comment period. But the good thing about it is that if you have an individual issue that we haven't thought about or that they haven't addressed, it's good to bring those up during the comment period. They will respond to it in the final rule, I guess. And so they'll explain what their thinking is on that. So it's good if you make a comment, and you can go online and it tells you there how to submit comments to the rule. Yeah.
One other question. You made a comment earlier, maybe I misunderstood, about vets have to sell antibiotics.
I don't think I said that. No, vets don't have to. No, vets are writing the VFDs that then go. The VFD goes from the veterinarian to the producer and also to the distributor or the feed manufacturer. They then work out ultimately how much feed they're producing and that kind of thing. The veterinarian's doesn't have to sell the antimicrobial now. All right, Jennifer.
And in terms of comments, you can also let me, Liz, or Harry know if you have any thoughts on that, because we typically comment as well, and can incorporate those into our comments too. Okay, so this is our last slide, which is great. And then we'll have a couple minutes for questions if you have any. Just in terms of industry efforts, so obviously we're going to have outreach and education to producers and veterinarians on this topic. As you can see, it's complex, and we'll continue working with FDA to understand some of the intricacies of the VFD, and we'll do our outreach and education on this through state meetings. We have several industry communications planned. ASV will have parallel outreach to their veterinarians. And our PQA Plus right now is in a revision stage, so this will reflect some of the emphasis in this on these changes, being aware of working closely with your veterinarian and the importance of record keeping. And we are considering, as we said, to work with other organizations, our other commodity group organizations, to ensure consistent understanding of the VFD rule. And we're honing our research priorities to really focus on the priorities for the pork board and for the pork industry on this whole issue of antibiotic use and resistance. And that summarizes our presentation. If you have any questions, I think we have just maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then we're also available at any point through email, phone calls, or in person for questions.